Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the All in Crypto podcast. I am your host, Rupert, and today I am delighted to be rejoined by Edan Yago, who, of course, is pioneering Bitcoin with BitcoinOS and a variety of other things that I'm sure we're going to get into in this video. So, Edan, welcome on board. How are you?
I'm great. How are you? Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. I was just saying, I think it was nearly 2 years ago that we last spoke, and we spoke about some of the amazing things you were looking to bring to Bitcoin, like a Bitcoin-backed stablecoin. We spoke, I think, broadly about Sovereign, but this idea of DeFi for Bitcoin more broadly. And of course, here you are today, kind of to talk about the expansion of that and the kind of connection between perhaps Cardano and Bitcoin more broadly. So it's a real pleasure to have you back on. I really want to start with an overview of BitcoinOS. So there's some people out there that might be unfamiliar with it. Let's maybe start with what BitcoinOS is before we break down the various components, what it's trying to do more broadly, and then, of course, the recent announcement at the Cardano Summit.
Sure. So for the last 10 plus years, we've had basically two worlds in the crypto asset space that didn't touch each other, right? On the one hand, we've got the biggest asset and the biggest blockchain, BTC, digital gold. It does one thing. It provides you with this self-sovereign asset, the self-sovereign property called BTC, and you can transfer your digital gold from one person to another, or you can hodl it, but that's basically all you can do with it. And on the other hand, we've got this extremely innovative and messy and chaotic environment where, innovation comes from chaos, and the chaos is there, right? And so you get the development of zero knowledge proofs and modular systems and new kinds of chains and chains that are focused. And really the way this started was people were looking at Bitcoin and saying, okay, what can't Bitcoin do? Let's offer an alternative. And so you get all of these outs, right? Bitcoin with smart contracts, we call that Ethereum. Bitcoin with privacy, we call that Monero. Bitcoin with suits, we call that Ripple. And so this entire ecosystem built out. And in the one, you can, in a decentralized way, manage all of your assets. You've got systems which allow you to borrow and lend without putting your money into Celsius or BlockFi. You've got exchanges which allow you to trade without putting your money into FTX. You've got DAOs which allow you to organize without setting up a company. And on and on and on. You've now got systems which are trying to sort of embed themselves in the real world, right? Real world assets, deepen, decentralized, mobile, decentralized AI. And so what we have between these two things is the world's fastest growing economy ever, period. 0 to $2 trillion in 16 years. By the end of year 17, we will be at, $5 trillion economy. And the reason that it's grown so fast is because we've unleashed the free market in a way that we never have before. But the weird thing is that the place that we started all of this system which is designed to provide the most perfect property rights, the most perfect sort of self-controlled asset, BTC ever, that the whole point of it was that you never needed to go through a middleman. That is the one asset that you need to go through a middleman the most, right? Because you can't do any kind of asset management in a decentralized way on Bitcoin. And so that's what needs to change. And if that changes, the implications are massive.
Yeah, absolutely. I know you've spoken, and certainly I listened to you speak at the Cardano Summit about how you've got these two lines that were never to cross, and now they're kind of bending back towards one another. And if you look at...
Towards each other.
Yeah, towards each other. And if you look at the sort of founders of the altcoin market, they all kind of come from, whether that's Vitalik, whether that's Charles Hoskinson, from the early days of Bitcoin, and kind of going, how can we improve this? How can we innovate this? And ultimately, it's kind of been a long way to come home, I think. And that brings us perfectly on to BitcoinOS. How is BitcoinOS trying to enable the collision of these two worlds once more?
Sure. So the way I think about Bitcoin is rather different. In fact, the way I think about the crypto asset space is quite a bit different from the way I think a lot of people think about it. So if you think about what we call our industry, we call it the blockchain industry. And I think that is sort of the perfect example of an industry that doesn't understand itself, because nobody's buying a blockchain and hardly anyone even wants to use a blockchain. Blockchains are like the worst database system ever invented. But what we really are is we're a crypto asset industry, right? We're an industry creating these decentralized self-sovereign property rights. And the core technology for that is a ledger, right? A place where you can govern these assets, create these assets, write these assets, decide, always have like a registry of which assets exist and who owns them, and the ability to transact. And in that respect, Bitcoin is kind of perfect. It is doing just that. It's this ultra secure, ultra trusted global ledger, global settlement mechanism. Now, we wanted to build, there's been this dream to build the ability to manage these assets, to build like smart contract systems that can manage these assets in a decentralized way too. And because of the technology that was available at the time, Vitalik was like, he actually tried to do this on Bitcoin first, but that wasn't working. And so he went and created this other chain. And instead of having like a really thin chain, which really just does one thing, right? Instead of creating a ledger, he created this whole thing. In fact, in the early days, they used to call it the world computer because that's how thick it was supposed to be. And so you stuff everything in there, all of the data and all of the programming and all of the computation, everything gets stuffed into that. And Bitcoiners were saying, this isn't going to work. And, lo and behold, the minute it got a little bit popular, the whole thing sort of broke down. Transactions weren't processing, things were too expensive. And so now Ethereum is trying to move everything off chain. And so, just 2 days ago, for the first time ever, more than 95% of Ethereum transactions were done off chain. And what this basically is now Ethereum, even though it was built to be very, very thick, is primarily being used as just a ledger. And you have all of these transactions happening in rollups and in any other systems. And what they do is they take their transactions, compress them down into a type of proof called a zero knowledge proof, and post that proof to the ledger, right? And so then you get the security of the ledger, right? But you get all of the heavy lifting done off chain. But coming back to what I was saying earlier, right? The perfect chain to do this with is Bitcoin, because that's exactly what Bitcoin is designed to be. It's just designed to be the perfect ledger. And so what BitcoinOS is we've built an operating system for Bitcoin. And what this operating system does is it allows you to take computation, to run any computation, compress it down into a ZK proof, write it, verify it, secure it, and execute it on Bitcoin. And this is basically a way that Bitcoin suddenly becomes a smart contract platform with the capacity to have eyes and a brain and do all of this asset management, where the heavy lifting is done off chain, where it should be, and the changes on the ledger are reflected on Bitcoin. And that is a sea change. That is, that is a restructuring and a rethinking, not just of Bitcoin, but of crypto, finance, property rights more generally. And to make that happen, a huge breakthrough was required. A lot of people thought, this is impossible. That's been the general assumption up until now. The only way you could do it was to, fork Bitcoin to make it more like Ethereum, and nobody wanted to do that. And so what we figured out and what we managed to build is a ZK, right, a zero knowledge proof verification system for Bitcoin. And we, released a white paper about it, and then we built it, and then we performed the first zero knowledge verification at Bitcoin Nashville a few months ago, and then we open sourced the system, and now we are building out the entire OS to make this useful for developers, to do everything from shielded or private transactions on Bitcoin, to build rollups on Bitcoin, to do programmable tokens like ERC20 style on Bitcoin, and the ability for Bitcoin to have eyes and a brain to see and understand what is happening on other chains, so that what the activity that happens on other chains can also be reflected and executed on Bitcoin.
I don't think people quite realize how much of a big deal this actually is. I'm sure many do, but I don't think the broader crypto space as a whole quite realizes what this means. I listened very recently to an interview that Charles Hoskinson's gave, and he essentially said there was almost tears in his eyes when he found out that you guys essentially enabled this, because what this means for the space as a whole is massive. And I have previously listened to yourself talking about sort of crypto bull markets and how this bull market may center, or one of the narratives of this bull market may center around the abilities for Bitcoin to actually do this. I don't know if you could break that down in a little bit more detail.
Yeah, sure. I think, kind of going back to what I was saying earlier, basically everything that we've seen, the entire evolution of the crypto space up until now has been based on a single question, which is, what can Bitcoin not do? Bitcoin can't do smart contracts, will do Ethereum or Solana. Bitcoin can't do privacy, will do Monero. Bitcoin can't do, banking integrations, will do Ripple. Bitcoin can't do governance, will do Tezos. Bitcoin, etc., etc., etc. Right? And if you take that away, if now Bitcoin can do anything, then we need to rethink, like literally from first principles, what is the entire crypto space? Because if Bitcoin can do everything, and the question we've been asking ourselves is, what can Bitcoin not do? So now the whole industry changes, because the fundamental question becomes, what are we building for Bitcoin? And that is why we've seen a whole bunch of projects who are beginning to integrate the technology of BitcoinOS. So they're integrating themselves into Bitcoin. And, I thought it would take years, honestly. This is a very, very big change. It's like, but I forgot how fast things move in crypto. So yeah, you're right. It's going to take time for people to wrap their heads around it's like a complete inversion of the crypto space. But that is happening much faster than I expected. So within just a few months, Cardano had seen what we had done, had gone from seeing what we had done to starting to have conversations with us and looking into what we were doing, to announcing that they were going to be doing a deep integration, allowing you to now think of Bitcoin as this ledger system and Cardano as this execution system, right? Which can execute smart contracts. You can move your BTC into Cardano, and you can execute there, or you can have the smart contracts on Cardano and have them execute on Bitcoin, right? And so this is a much tighter coupling between this system, which has been designed in many ways to be like the best smart contract layer for Bitcoin, because it's UTXO based instead of account based. So this robust smart contract layer is now sort of pairing up with this vast asset, which is BTC, and the ledger that makes it possible.
And I want to maybe touch a little bit on, I want to dive in just a second before we get onto Cardano and that kind of integration more broadly. I also want to touch on some of the kind of pushback that we might have seen from some of the Bitcoin community in regards to why we even need to do this. But before we do all that, I really just want to talk about Bitcoin's success as a whole. It is just unbelievable to me. It's believable at this point just how far, we talk about technologies getting adopted. Me and you have been in the cryptocurrency space. I'm sure you probably had more of a vision for everything than I did for quite a while. It's absolutely fascinating how you have the largest asset manager in the world now doing a presentation where he has a slide of the debasement of the dollar in relation to Bitcoin, and he's giving that to their institutional clients. Talk about technologies getting adopted. And this is why I think what you're doing is unbelievably important, because as Bitcoin finds itself as more of a globally recognized asset, the need to do things with it in a decentralized fashion, true to Bitcoin's ethos, has only just absolutely blown up. I don't know if you've got anything to sort of add on to that.
I do actually, remarkably specific to BlackRock.
Yep.
So BlackRock have basically two teams working on, what they consider the digital asset teams. One is focused on clients and client needs, and that is basically 100% Bitcoin because the clients are only interested in Bitcoin. And then the other is sort of like the innovation team, and they're working mostly on Ethereum. But they're trying to figure out, like, how do we do real world assets? How do we do smart contracts? How do we integrate? How do we do use blockchains for settlement? And one of the things, I was listening to one of the guys at BlackRock talk, and he was saying, like, one of the weird things about this is that there's this, like, the same division, the same sort of, like, these two worlds that don't talk to each other that exist in the crypto space as a whole is reflected in BlackRock. And they're like, but our clients want to use this asset, and we want to be able to take them to use all of these tools, but we can't make that connection. And so this is the, maybe the biggest deal here, because what we can now do by closing, by creating the connective tissue here and making it possible for these two worlds to talk together is that client base, right? They look at BTC and they say, we're super interested in the asset, right? But now BlackRock can sell them on what they can do with the asset, right? We're selling them on, okay, now you need a new asset and you're going to do this new chain as Ethereum. That's a sell they don't want to have. And so one of the things that I say a lot is, I've been thinking about this a lot. Why are we stuck? Why for the last 7 years have we been stuck as a casino industry, right? All of this innovation, but yet so much of it is memes and Ponzi's and exchanges that are casinos. It's basically a giant casino. It's a great casino, but it's a giant casino. And the reason is that the infrastructure that we've built, the Ethereums and the Solanas of the world, they are built like software, right? They change every 6 months. Every time there's a new narrative, they go and change their code so that they can take advantage of the new narrative. Sometimes the system will stop working completely. The code base just gets more and more and more and more complicated, to the point, like with Ethereum today, there's not a single person in the entire world who understands Ethereum's code base. And when you are thinking about asset management, right, which is something, if you're thinking about real finance, you're thinking about savings, you're thinking about 30-year bonds, you're thinking about 35-year mortgages, you're thinking about infrastructure projects which have payback periods of 50 years, right? You're thinking about generational wealth. You're not going to do that on a system that you don't know if it's even going to be around in 5 years. But Bitcoin's here forever. And so the reason we've been a casino industry is because the infrastructure that we've had has been short term. It's been software. And now Bitcoin is permaware, but it wasn't able to utilize that because it couldn't do the asset management, right? It could only create this one asset. But now we can bring to this permaware system, a system that's going to outlast any asset. We can bring asset management tools. And so now BlackRock can go to their customers and say, listen, not only can you buy Bitcoin, but you can earn yield in your Bitcoin. You can do it as a family office. You don't want to trust a third party, right? So you can custody the assets yourself. You can interact with 24/7 global, fully reliable settlement, right? And manage any kind of trade, any kind of asset that you want on a system which is as permanent as gold. That's how we move from being what feels to us like a big industry, but it's just a few. It's the casino industry, which is a multi-billion-dollar industry. But we move from that into real-world finance. That's a multi-trillion-dollar industry, and so that is sort of like the scope of the change that we're seeing. The gold itself is a $20 trillion asset. Bitcoin today is, I don't know, $1.5 trillion asset. By the end of next year, who knows? But let's call it a $4 to $5 trillion asset. if you take the analogy of the internet, right? The internet is this global network, and on top of the internet, you've got specific systems, right, which do specific things. The Amazons, the Facebooks of the world. Each of those is a multi-trillion-dollar company, right? Bitcoin is the internet for assets, the internet for value. And on top of that, we're going to see systems which become multi-trillion-dollar systems, asset management systems. You know, you can look at Cardano. What is their goal? They're saying, wow, we can integrate, we can be one of the platforms, one of the leading platforms providing asset management, right? Today, we're, I don't know, a $14 billion market cap. 10 years from now, we're going to be $1 trillion market cap.
It's kind of ironic, isn't it, how all these other systems were kind of built perhaps to introduce crypto to the broader financial world, whereas it's Bitcoin that is really going to be the premier crypto currency, the premier digital asset that's ultimately going to bring the real world to the digital asset space more broadly. I think that's kind of ironic in some senses, certainly as all these other systems were kind of built trying to do that. And actually it's been Bitcoin all along. It's truly been a fascinating sort of journey thus far, and where
It's
it
like
goes.
It's like that meme, you know. It's the space.
Yeah, it truly
The
where it goes
spaceman
is.
meme always was.
Yeah, no, literally, and this is the thing, and it's very. It always strikes me as almost like divine intervention that Bitcoin was given to us in 2008, given just how far things have progressed in regards to Bitcoin's use case being a kind of anti-fiat, a real store of value. It's almost kind of divine to me that this whole thing has kicked off in 2008, and look at where we are today in regards to its adoption, in regards to its role in the world, and probably more importantly in regards to the devaluation we've seen on the currency systems and how it's kind of game over for them almost. You know, once that sort of interest rate payment exceeds expenditure, you know, where do we go from there? Bitcoin's time really is to shine as we speak. You know, I don't know if you've got anything more generally on that.
Yes, I do actually. I think that we frequently speak about crypto and speak about Bitcoin as if, in order for it to succeed, the rest of the financial system needs to fail. As
Brilliant point.
if it's there as a insurance policy against fiat. And I don't think that's the case at all. I think that the way we should be thinking about it is this is the future of finance and the future of economy, no matter what happens. And the reason that is, if you look at the crypto industry itself, the crypto industry is the way that all economy is the whole economy is going to look like the crypto industry. The crypto industry figured out how to be fully remote, fully decentralized, and fully global before COVID. And why did it manage to do that? Because let's say I'm running a business. Okay, I can't just hire one guy in Brazil and one guy in India and one guy in China. Like, how do I pay them even? Before we get into all of the other sort of complexities of hiring and blah, how am I just going to pay them, right? And if I'm running a service, if I'm running a business, right, and I want to provide service to customers around the world, I need to go and I need to sign a contract with them. And okay, I'm in Singapore and they're in, I don't know, Argentina. And then if something goes wrong, who do I sue? Where? So now we say, all right, this contract is going to be governed by the courts of London. So now we've got a whole nother country involved, and there's all of this bureaucracy and the capital controls, and blah, blah, blah. The whole thing's ridiculously complicated. And so running a global business, even today, is extremely, extremely complicated. And only the very, very largest businesses even try. And then here, you in crypto, what do you see? You see a project. It sets up a DAO. It creates a token. It says, all right, look, I'm going to pay people in BTC, or I'm going to pay people in stable coins. Okay, so I can pay literally everyone anywhere. And I can let anyone use my service, because I don't even need a contract, right? Just come, buy my token, pay for my service with the token. If you want to use Ethereum, you use ETH. If you want to use, Chainlink, you use Link. And basically that token, what is that token? That token is a 21st century contract. That's why we call them smart contracts. It basically says, if you have this, you can use this service. You get certain rights to this service. That is 21st century economy. Global, borderless, instantaneous. That is the way everything is going to look. Right? So if you want to know what the world's going to look like in 15 years, just look at the crypto industry today. It doesn't matter if the fiat collapses or governments become over indebted, or makes no difference. That is the future. That is the future of tens of trillions of dollars of annual trade and global commerce. Everyone is going to be working that way. And more importantly than every single human, every single AI, which is going to be the majority of workers, are going to be these AI agents. They're all going to be working that way because they can't even sign a contract. They can't even open a bank account. So that's the economy 15 years from now. And we're basically building the infrastructure that's making that possible. So bottom line, the doomerism that people, I get it's attractive, right? Oh, yeah. I've seen behind the veil. The world is collapsing. I'm going to gather my guns, my cans of tuna, and my Bitcoin. Cool. Go do that. I've done that. I live off grid, sort of like some kind of feral mountain man. But the reality is, one way or another, I think that's the less likely. It's not like the zombie apocalypse is the most likely scenario. And one way or another, we're building this truly global, seamless financial system where everyone can have property rights, which don't depend on the local laws of a specific place. That is the future.
Yep, absolutely. It's like, why do people send emails instead of letters right now? It makes sense to do
Exactly.
so. It wasn't that letters all caught fire and were just unusable
But
anymore.
Yeah, I mean, the government and sort of the power companies still send letters, but the rest of the world has moved on. So it's, debt or no debt, the current system is becoming more and more irrelevant.
I think that's an amazing point that you've just made there, because we do all get so sort of I guess focused on what's going on with the debt systems. I think the emperor sort of realizing that he's naked is coming, but at the same time, I think the point that you make there is an absolutely sensational one. Why are we using emails instead of a letter? Why are we going to use Bitcoin instead of sort of the traditional financial systems? Well, it's quite obvious. It's a better technology, right? And it's more of a globally inclusive one, etc., etc., etc. And this brings me perfectly on to my next point, because I have seen, and I've always seen this, not just on the recent announcement in regards to the integration of Cardano, but I've always seen a pushback by some, not many in the Bitcoin community, in regards to this idea of allowing for all these capabilities on Bitcoin. I think some people put forward the argument that in some way it kind of dilutes the potency of Bitcoin. I'd like to maybe explore your pushback as somebody who's very much pioneering the counter argument to this in regards to why should we even be doing this on Bitcoin? Surely it furthers its role as a system. I don't know if you could sort of extend on that.
Do you know what Stockholm Syndrome is?
Yes.
All right. So Stockholm Syndrome is when someone is taken hostage and they start to identify with the person who's taken them hostage. Yeah, all of these maxis are suffering Stockholm Syndrome. They've been taken hostage by the fact that Bitcoin can't do these things, and they start to identify with the fact that Bitcoin can't do these things, right? Well, I mean, I believe Bitcoin is going to rule the world, but Bitcoin can't do all of the stuff. So that must mean that all of the stuff is unnecessary or bad or evil or a scam. This is Stockholm Syndrome. And I think it's going to be 6 months, a year, 2 years before all of that maxi nonsense is dead. Because basically, what BitcoinOS has just done, what Boss has just done with our technology, is we've released the hostages.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and this idea that it sort of dilutes Bitcoin's purpose, surely it only enriches Bitcoin as this kind of premier asset, this premium asset in the world. Surely that's the case rather than
the whole idea. The whole idea that you're going to build a new global economy with a reserve asset and there's only going to be one asset was absurd from the very beginning. There is no such thing as an economy with only one asset. There is no such thing as a currency without any economy, right? We have to build a Bitcoin native economy for Bitcoin to be the currency of that economy. Otherwise, Bitcoin is the currency of what exactly? So the whole thing was absurd.
Yep.
That's
No,
what I mean by Stockholm Syndrome.
yeah, no, I think Stockholm Syndrome is the perfect sort of way to coin it. Pardon the pun there. I want to kind of get on to now. There was a big announcement made by yourself. You know, I got very excited personally about it. I know the whole Cardano community and the Bitcoin community got very excited about the kind of announcement of Cardano's integration with Bitcoin. And before we explore what this means in more detail, perhaps we could just sort of explore, and we touched on it briefly, how this came about. How is the kind of coalition between Bitcoin OS, Bitcoin more broadly, and Cardano? How did that come about, Yago?
Well, I think the good folks over at Cardano saw that we had managed to verify ZK on Bitcoin because they've been, thinking carefully and deeply about what ZK can mean for sort of scalability and the ability to, bring programmability to chains and crypto. They saw this and they were like, "Holy shit!" And so they reached out to us, and now we started working together to figure out how Cardano can integrate into BitcoinOS and vice versa. And this is work that's going to take months, but next year we're going to start seeing the first fruits of this. Initially, it's going to be the ability to have what is effectively a trustless bridge. Um, between Bitcoin and Cardano, initially for assets. So you'll be able to move BTC into Cardano. And so Cardano might see a flood of BTC. You'll be able to see assets issued on other types of assets issued on Bitcoin or on Cardano sort of move between the chains. And then where we go from there is the ability to have sort of smart contracts that the computation is all done on Cardano, but the execution is done on Bitcoin, right? So, like going back to what I said earlier, ultimately you have a ledger and you have a cloud of computation. And then if you can take from this cloud of computation, you can compress that cloud of computation into a ZK proof, write that to Bitcoin in such a way that it can be validated, verified, executed on Bitcoin, then all of that computation becomes available. It starts moving things on the ledger. And that's it. Now you've got a smart contract system that's thin, that doesn't change Bitcoin. Everything that we're doing doesn't require a soft fork. Everything that we're doing works on Bitcoin mainnet as it is today. And one of our goals is to make sure that Bitcoin doesn't need to change, because this one of the most powerful properties, in fact, I would argue the single most important thing about Bitcoin is that it's permaware, right? Up until now, we've only had two things. We've had hardware, which, stays the same but isn't reliable over long periods of time because hardware deteriorates. We've got software, which can be upgraded and can change over time, but isn't reliable because it's constantly changing. We then have this new thing that Bitcoin invented, permaware, right? The system which is not going to fall to pieces as the physical materials deteriorate, but can last literally forever, but doesn't change, just like hardware. And that is exactly what you need. That is the exact property that turns Bitcoin into digital gold, right? And that allows Bitcoin to be a ledger for any asset, which secures those assets for as long as those assets are going to be valuable.
With all this sort of exciting developments and announcements, what kind of things do you envision taking place between Bitcoin and Cardano specifically? What are some of the things you're really excited about? Some of the big use cases? How do you see all this unfolding?
I think there's just a few obvious things that people are going to want to do, right? People don't want to sell their Bitcoin, but they would love to get some cash, right? So the ability to borrow against your Bitcoin without putting your Bitcoin with like a BlockFi, that's going to be huge. BlockFi had billions and billions and billions of Bitcoin because people wanted to borrow against it. The other reason that people were depositing into risky things like Celsius and BlockFi was because they wanted to earn yield. And so people starting to generate yield on their Bitcoin, that's going to be another huge wave. Bitcoin-backed stablecoins is like the most obvious thing, right? The dollar used to be backed by gold, so now the dollar should be backed by digital gold. Um, uh, I think also obvious, if people do want to trade, the ability to do that with Bitcoin-backed stablecoins, with regular stablecoins, with BTC, and a whole bunch of other assets, we're going to start seeing that. But that is a sort of like in the short term. I think the longer term is what I was talking about earlier. My view is that the overall economy is going to look more and more like the crypto economy with every single day that passes. We already have businesses that are transacting in USDT. You already go down to Argentina and you can pay, with BTC or with Tether when you're taking an Uber or a taxi. We're already starting to see global companies transacting using these systems. But more than that, the crypto economy itself is growing so fast and starting to do so many different kinds of services that it in and of itself is just becoming a bigger and bigger piece of the economy. And this is all before we start getting into AI becoming sort of like the dominant force in the economy over the next 10, 15 years. Ultimately, what I think we're going to need is we're going to need a global ledger for all the world's most valuable assets. That ledger is going to be Bitcoin. And then we're going to need systems which can do more sophisticated asset management, which is to say smart contracts. And Cardano, they're clearly making a play to do that. And the winning projects doing that. Look, I mean, let's roll the tape forward. 15 years from now, Bitcoin is going to be, I don't know, somewhere between a 20 and $40 trillion asset. Around that, there's going to be trillions of dollars of economic activity, right? And so if you look at the internet is important and very valuable. It moves information around, but it only moves information. It moves no value. So what happened is that the companies that built around the internet could operate on a global scale and could build on this really, really phenomenally valuable network. But all they could really do is advertising. Google make all their money from advertising. YouTube make all their money from advertising. Twitter make their money from advertising. Facebook make their money from advertising. And the big ones, even though their whole business model is just advertising, right, which is like nothing, are trillion-dollar behemoths, right? So the winning systems that provide asset management to Bitcoin, which is not just BTC, right? BTC will be, I don't know, $40 trillion asset, but there'll be tens of trillions of dollars, maybe even more, of other assets on the Bitcoin network. And then you will, and part of those assets that are on the Bitcoin network are going to be the tokens of the systems that are providing the asset management, which are going to be these other systems, which are also going to be worth trillions. So, and this is like I'm saying in 15 years, I may be underestimating this. It took 20 years for the internet from the the dot-com crash to the first trillion-dollar companies on the internet was 20 years. And it was sort of gradually then suddenly there were no trillion-dollar companies, then there was Apple, and then it was Google, and then there was Amazon, and then there was Nvidia and Facebook, etc. Like it just and I think it's going to happen faster with crypto because it's fundamentally a more valuable thing, right? The ability to do advertising is one thing. The ability to manage the entire asset base of the global economy is a whole other order of magnitude. So I might be massively underestimating what we're about to see over the next 15 years.
Yeah, by all accounts, I believe crypto more broadly, certainly Bitcoin is the fastest adopted technology in the world right now, and of course that likely comes from prior technologies before it, enabling technologies to get as fastly adopted as they currently are being.
I would put a little bit of a caveat on that. I don't think that crypto is the fastest adopted technology in terms of people. I think a lot of other technologies have been adopted more quickly by masses and masses of people. And I think that a lot of people talk about bringing the next billion people into crypto. And that is definitely going to happen. But The reality is, what we are is we're an asset management, right, industry. We're the industry of value, and that the primary customer of that is not the individual. The primary customer of that are assets. And so if you want to see the fastest growing new economy in the world, I think you can think of crypto as Singapore in the sky, right? It's this entirely new economy, which is free and open and has grown from zero to, 2 trillion in 16 years. And by year 17 will be 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 trillion dollars. That's the fastest growing economy ever. And so even if we don't see sort of new users, but we do see more financial institutions using it and more of the assets moving on, that is going to be in and of itself the growth. So I'm less worried about making sure that every single person has a wallet. I want them to. I think it's good for them. I think for every single individual, I want to do everything I can to encourage them to be as self-sufficient and self-sovereign and financially in control of their futures as possible. But in terms of what is necessary for the global economy to change, the unfortunate reality is that the vast majority of people are basically economically irrelevant.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. And I love going back to what you sort of spoke about in regards to Bitcoin being a kind of internet comparison, and the likes of Cardano essentially being potentially those $1 trillion companies to come out of it. And I'm sure there's so many other avenues we could sort of dive into here. I know, and if you're available at some time, I'd love to have you back on to talk perhaps even specifically about AI and Bitcoin. However, really what I want to close on is your thoughts in regards to the future. You've mentioned 15 years down the line where you think Bitcoin as a market cap can be, where you think the world is going as a whole. In regards to the future, what I'm really talking about in the next year, 2, 3 years, what are some of the things you're really paying attention to and looking forward to that we should also be paying attention to?
I think that the entire crypto industry is being turned on its head right now. And that's the thing to pay attention to more than anything. And what do I mean by it's being turned on its head? It's being turned on its head because it's shifting from being a blockchain industry to being a asset industry. And it's shifting from being a blockchain industry to being an asset industry because, first of all, that was what it was always supposed to be. Nobody wants a blockchain. But it's happening right now because we now have the technologies that are unbundling the chains. So Ethereum is seeing the vast majority of its transactions occurring on all of these other chains, right, that they call rollups. But what is a rollup? A rollup is unbundling Ethereum, right? So a rollup maybe takes its data from Celestia and maybe takes its settlement from Ethereum and its transaction ordering or sequencing from its own sequencer. And so the whole thing is being unbundled. And that is because chains don't matter. They never did. It was always about ledgers. And it's the network effect is in the ledger because you want to be able to interact trustlessly with other assets. And so you need to be on the same ledger as they are on. So one of the first effects we're seeing of this is the struggle that Ethereum is happening, right? Ethereum sort of lost the narrative. Now, most people don't understand why Ethereum has lost narrative. They sort of understand it on a surface level, but maybe not on a deep level. What's happening to Ethereum is it's being unbundled. The very theory of why we even need Ethereum in the first place is being ripped apart. You don't need all of this stuff shoved into a chain. And the fact that sort of Bitcoin has entered the chat, this massive, the amount of, Bitcoin is like $1.4 trillion in assets. Maybe 10% of them are right now waiting to be used because Bitcoin is mostly, just people are used to sort of holding it and not doing anything with it. But if just 10% moves, that's $140 billion. That's bigger than the entire Ethereum DeFi ecosystem. just that's the difference in scale, right? So so Ethereum's struggling. I don't, and then we're seeing, because people are like, I don't know what the new narrative is. They're going to meme coins, like maybe meme coins is the new narrative. Like, think about, meme coins are fun and they're cool, but how can that be the new narrative? That's not the new narrative. That's not a projection of the future, right? That's not what the future economy looks like. The future economy is us all just sitting around, you know, gambling with each other. That's PvP. I hope
Yep.
the future isn't just PvP, right? And so sort of we're in this moment of crisis in the crypto industry where there is no new narrative. And the reason is because we think we're a blockchain industry and we're not. We're an asset industry. And so all of that is being turned up on its head. And the last part, the biggest part, I think, is the fact that with BitcoinOS, Bitcoin itself has entered the chat. Solana is now competing with Bitcoin. Ethereum is now competing with Bitcoin. And Bitcoin is just so much bigger, so much more well known, so much more trusted, so much more secure, and so much more perfectly built for just being a ledger. So I think what we're going to see over the next few years is systems adapt or die. Cardano is adapting. I think they're going to succeed. I'm not sure who's going to die.
Wow, powerful. I really sort of want to wrap things up on that note. It's a very exciting future, and it's, again, I think there's an irony in Bitcoin kind of now becoming a competitor to, or the band-aid kind of no longer being needed in regards to some of these other chains being made to solve problems on Bitcoin. Bitcoin's now solving those problems inherently, and you guys are pioneering that, which I think is fantastic. Just quickly, can you see other chains, and you talk about this kind of renaissance, can you see other chains actually, and is there plans for other chains to essentially do what Cardano are doing?
Yes.
Okay. I think we're going to leave it on that cliffhanger there. Edan, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you back on the show once again. A big thank you from myself and my entire audience. Hopefully we can have you again sometime soon.